The sun was beginning to set on the horizon as the Mitchell family's car wound its way along the sinuous road leading into rural Montana. Mark, a 42-year-old man with gray hair at his temples, kept his hands firmly on the wheel while observing the gradually changing landscape. Beside him, Sarah absently flipped through a magazine, occasionally looking up to admire the distant mountains. In the back seat, their teenage son Jason was absorbed in his cell phone. "How much longer, Dad?" asked Jason, finally looking up from his screen. "About 2 hours, son. We're almost to Pine Creek," replied Mark, adjusting the rearview mirror. "This trip will do us all good. It's been a while since we've taken a vacation together." Sarah smiled, placing her hand on her husband's arm. "Since you took that position at the company, we barely see you anymore. I promise these 2 weeks will be just for you," Mark assured them. "No work calls, no emails, just us and nature." Their conversation was interrupted when something unexpected appeared on the road, causing Mark to slam on the brakes. A German shepherd suddenly emerged from the woods, standing in the middle of the asphalt. The animal was dirty, its fur matted, and it was breathing heavily. "Watch out, Dad," exclaimed Jason, leaning forward between the seats. The car stopped just a few yards from the animal, which, contrary to what might be expected, didn't flee at the sound of the engine. Instead, the German shepherd remained motionless, staring at the vehicle with disconcerting intensity. "That's strange," commented Sarah, furrowing her brow. "He seems to be waiting for something." As if responding to her observation, the dog began to bark insistently, approaching the car with faltering steps. "He must be lost," suggested Jason, "or abandoned. Look how thin he is." Mark hesitated, glancing at his watch. "We shouldn't delay any longer. We're already on a tight schedule." "Dad, we can't just leave him here," protested Jason. "Look at him. It's like he's trying to tell us something." Before Mark could respond, the teenager had already opened the car door and stepped onto the road. The German shepherd, seeing him, instantly stopped barking. The animal tilted its head, as if assessing the boy, then turned and ran a few yards toward the woods, stopping to look back, as if checking whether Jason was following. "Jason, get back in the car now," ordered Mark, also getting out of the vehicle. "Dad, he wants us to follow him," exclaimed Jason, ignoring the order. "Something's wrong." Sarah joined them on the road, watching the dog's unusual behavior with concern. "Mark, maybe we should call someone. A forest ranger, perhaps?" The German shepherd barked again, this time with more urgency, and ran a few more yards toward the forest, again stopping to check if they were following. "I don't know, Sarah. We're in the middle of nowhere. By the time we get hold of someone." "Then let's follow him," insisted Jason. "Just a little way to see what he wants to show us." Mark sighed, looking at his wife, who, after a moment's hesitation, nodded. "All right, but we stay together and don't go far from the road. And you stay between us, Jason." "I'll get the flashlight," said Sarah, quickly returning to the car. When she returned, the trio began to follow the German shepherd, who now seemed more relieved and determined. As they advanced into the vegetation, the sun disappeared over the horizon, casting increasingly long shadows between the trees. "I'm starting to think this wasn't a good idea," muttered Mark, as he watched the dog move nimbly through the bushes, always looking back to ensure they continued following. As they entered the woods, the Mitchell family noticed that the terrain was becoming increasingly uneven. The remaining daylight filtered through the treetops, creating a mosaic of shadows on the forest floor. The German shepherd walked a few yards ahead, occasionally looking back, as if to make sure his new allies were still with him. "Look at this," said Jason, crouching to examine the ground. "There are footprints here." Mark and Sarah approached. Indeed, the ground showed distinct marks. Some clearly belonged to humans, while others appeared to be from dogs of different sizes. More alarming was a continuous furrow in the earth, as if something heavy had been dragged recently. "This doesn't seem normal," murmured Sarah, hugging her arms. "Mark, I have a bad feeling." "Maybe we should go back," agreed Mark, looking around suspiciously. The German shepherd, who had stopped a few yards ahead, let out a low whine, almost like a plea. His eyes, intelligent and attentive, seemed to communicate an urgency that transcended the barrier between species. "He needs our help, Dad," insisted Jason. "We can't simply turn our backs now." "I'm going to give him a name," decided the teenager, trying to ease the tension. "I'll call him Apollo, like the Greek god." The Sime. Dog tilted his head as if approving the name. This gesture, so human in nature, didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. "Are you noticing that he doesn't act like a normal dog?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "It seems like he understands everything we're saying." "Must just be a well-trained animal," replied Mark, though he didn't seem very convinced by his own words. They continued to follow Apollo for a few more minutes, advancing deeper into the forest. The silence was oppressive, interrupted only by the occasional song of a distant bird or the rustling of leaves under their feet. The further they moved from the road, the more Mark questioned the wisdom of their decision. "If we don't find anything in the next 5 minutes, we go back to the car," he declared firmly. That's when Apollo stopped abruptly, his body rigid, ears alert. Before them, partially hidden by vegetation, was a metal structure that completely clashed with the natural environment. "What is that?" asked Jason, pointing. "Looks like a warehouse," replied Mark, frowning. "But in the middle of the forest? That doesn't make sense." Approaching cautiously, the family noticed that despite its abandoned appearance, there were signs of recent use. The rust on the hinges of the main door showed bright scratches, as if it had been opened recently. Above the entrance, a small red light blinked discreetly, a security camera still functioning. "Someone uses this place," observed Sarah, noticing the marks on the ground around the warehouse. "And recently." Apollo sat down in front of the door, looking alternately at the entrance and at the family, as if inviting them to proceed. His behavior was so deliberate, so calculated, that it couldn't be explained as mere animal instinct. "I think he wants us to go in," said Jason, taking a step forward. Mark held his son by the arm. "Wait, we don't know what's in there. It could be dangerous." "But Dad, we've come this far." "I have to agree with Jason," intervened Sarah, surprising her husband. "We're already involved. If someone is doing something illegal here, we need to find out." Mark looked at his wife, then at his son, and finally at Apollo, who remained seated, patient and resolute. Something in the animal's gaze conveyed not just intelligence, but an almost human determination. "All right," Mark finally agreed. "But we stay together the whole time, and at the first sign of danger we leave immediately, understood?" Jason and Sarah nodded. Mark then approached the warehouse door, testing the handle. To his surprise, it was unlocked. With a metallic creak, the door opened, revealing a dark and cavernous interior. The smell was the first thing they noticed, a mixture of rusty metal, chemicals, and something indefinable, almost organic. Sarah turned on the flashlight, the beam of light cutting through the darkness to reveal a large space filled with equipment, stacked boxes, and tables with computers. "What is this place?" whispered Jason, his eyes wide at the surreal scene. Apollo entered calmly, his body tense but determined. He stopped in the center of the warehouse, turning his head as if looking for something specific. Then, staring intently at the family, he advanced a few more steps, clearly expecting them to follow him into the depths of this mysterious place. The interior of the warehouse revealed a shocking contrast with its external appearance. While, from the outside, it looked like an abandoned construction, inside it was a labyrinth of technology and sophisticated equipment. Sarah slowly directed the flashlight beam around the environment, illuminating monitors, control panels, and tables covered with scientific instruments. "This looks like a laboratory," she whispered, approaching one of the tables. Jason, fascinated by the discovery, walked to one of the monitors that surprisingly was still on. On the screen, wavy lines pulsed in different colors and rhythms, as if recording some kind of activity. "These are brain waves," observed the teenager, who had always been interested in science. "They're monitoring something." Mark, remaining alert, examined some of the documents scattered on the floor. Many appeared to have been hastily burned, leaving only partially legible fragments. On one, the title Project Sentinel appeared in large letters, followed by paragraphs of technical text and data tables. "Looks like they abandoned this place in a hurry," he commented. left a lot behind. Apollo remained close to the family, but his attention was clearly divided. The German Shepherd seemed restless, moving from side to side, occasionally stopping to sniff the air or look in the direction of a metal door at the back of the warehouse. "He wants us to see something specific," observed Sarah, following the animal's gaze. Approaching the door indicated by Apollo, the family hesitated. What else might they find in this strange place? Mark was the first to gather his courage, carefully pushing the door. It opened with a metallic groan, revealing an even more disturbing room. Rows of metal cages occupied most of the space, and inside them, various dogs of different breeds watched the newcomers with a disconcerting intensity. Unlike what would be expected from animals in captivity, there were no frantic barks or displays of fear. Instead, they all remained silent, with fixed and attentive gazes. "My God," exclaimed Sarah, bringing her hand to her mouth. "What are they doing with these animals?" Jason approached one of the cages, where a border collie observed him with eyes that seemed to convey unusual intelligence. "They don't seem scared, they seem aware." When Apollo entered the room, something extraordinary happened. The caged dogs moved in perfect synchrony, all standing up and positioning themselves, facing the German Shepherd. There were no barks or any other sound, just that coordinated movement, as if responding to a silent command. "Did you see that?" whispered Jason, open-mouthed. Mark nodded, unable to find words to express how bizarre the scene was. That's when he noticed a large panel on the side wall, covered with photographs, diagrams, and annotations. Approaching, he began to understand the magnitude of what they had discovered. "They're experimenting on these animals," he explained, studying the documents. "Something related to intelligence and communication. It seems they're trying to amplify the cognitive capacity of dogs." "Why?" questioned Sarah, still shocked by the sight of the animals in captivity. "I'm not sure," replied Mark, leafing through some more papers. "But from what I'm seeing here, they've achieved surprising results. They talk about expanded consciousness and canine neural network." Jason, who had approached a computer that was on, urgently called his parents. "Look at this. There are videos of the experiments." On the screen, images of dogs connected to machines showed how electrodes implanted in their brains allowed scientists to monitor and potentially manipulate their neural activity. The face of a middle-aged man with glasses and a lab coat appeared in several of the videos, explaining procedures and results. "Dr. Wilson," read Jason from one of the captions. "He seems to be responsible for all this." As they explored the place further, Sarah found a folder with detailed files on each of the dogs. In one of them, she immediately recognized Apollo's photo. "It says here that he was the first to demonstrate consistent results," she read aloud. "They call him Alpha Subject. Wait, there's more. Only specimen to develop interdirectional communication and independent strategic decision-making capacity." Mark and Jason approached to see the document. The implications of those words were profound and disturbing. "Are they saying Apollo can think like a human?" Jason asked, looking at the German Shepherd who remained vigilant near the door. Before anyone could answer, a sharp beep echoed through the warehouse. On one of the main monitors, a message flashed ominously in red. "Protocol activated, unauthorized presence." The flashing alert on the monitor triggered a wave of instant panic. Mark ran to the window, carefully opening a small gap in the dusty blinds. Outside, headlights cut through the darkness of the forest. Vehicles were rapidly approaching. "We have company," he announced, turning to the family with urgency in his voice. "We need to hide now." Sarah grabbed Jason by the arm, pulling him away from the computer. "Let's go, hurry." Apollo, once again demonstrating behavior that defied normal understanding of animals, moved decisively toward a stack of boxes in the farthest corner of the room. The German Shepherd looked at the family and then at the improvised hiding place as if indicating the way. "He wants us to hide there," whispered Jason, running in the direction indicated by the dog. Quickly, the family positioned themselves behind the boxes, crouching to minimize their visibility. From their hiding place, they could observe the main entrance to the warehouse and part of the room with the cages. Sarah turned off the flashlight, plunging them into darkness. The only light came from the still active monitors and the intermittent light of the alert. It wasn't long before the sound of car doors slamming broke the silence, followed by male voices giving short, precise orders. The main door of the warehouse opened violently, and several figures hurriedly entered the place. "Clear everything. I don't want any evidence remaining," ordered an authoritative voice. As the newcomers approached the illuminated area, the family could distinguish their attire. Some wore white laboratory coats, while others wore dark uniforms with insignias that were difficult to identify. They all seemed to act with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed operation. "Take the animals first," continued the leader of the group, a tall man with graying hair whom Sarah recognized from the photos as Dr. Wilson. "Phase 2 begins tomorrow, and we can't delay the schedule anymore." "What about the data, Doctor?" asked one of the uniformed men. "Delete everything. We can't take. If anyone discovers what we're doing here..." Dr. Wilson didn't complete the sentence, but the implication was clear. Whatever the purpose of Project Sentinel, its creators were determined to keep it secret. Jason, observing the scene with fascination and terror, noticed something concerning. While the men began to dismantle equipment and collect documents, the dogs in the cages displayed strange behavior. They had all positioned themselves facing Apollo, as if awaiting some kind of command. "Look at that," whispered the boy to his parents. "It's like they're communicating." Indeed, although no sound was emitted, there was a palpable tension in the air, a feeling that information was being exchanged in a way that escaped human perception. "Where's the Alpha?" suddenly asked one of the scientists, looking around with concern. "His cage is empty." "What?" Dr. Wilson quickly crossed the room, stopping in front of the open cage that presumably belonged to Apollo. "Impossible. The security system should have alerted us if he escaped." "Unless someone helped him," suggested another man, looking around suspiciously. The comment made Mark swallow hard. Beside him, Apollo remained motionless, only his intelligent eyes moving, following each action of the intruders. "Check the entire perimeter," ordered Dr. Wilson. "He can't have gone far. And speed up the evacuation process. I want everything clean in 30 minutes. While the team dispersed to carry out the orders, Sarah took the moment to whisper to her husband, "Mark, what do we do now? If they find us here, we need to wait for an opportunity to leave without being seen," he replied, trying to stay calm, "as soon as they're distracted enough." Jason, however, had another idea. Pointing to one of the computers still on and momentarily unattended, he whispered, "We can get evidence of what they're doing here. If we can copy some of these files..." "No way," cut in Mark. "It's too risky." But Apollo seemed to have understood the teenager's suggestion. With a silent movement, the German Shepherd moved away from the hiding place, slinking through the shadows with impressive agility. "What is he doing?" whispered Sarah, alarmed. It didn't take long to find out. While most of the men were busy with the cages of the other dogs, Apollo approached the main computer area. With a sudden movement, he knocked over a cart of equipment, causing a crash that immediately attracted everyone's attention. "There he is!" shouted one of the scientists, pointing at Apollo. In the chaos that followed, with everyone running toward the noise, Jason realized the dog's strategy. "He's creating a distraction," he murmured, amazed at the intelligence demonstrated by the animal. "This is our moment," concluded Mark. "Let's get out while everyone is focused on capturing him." "We can't leave him," protested Jason, seeing how Apollo was now running between the tables, always staying one step ahead of his pursuers. Chaos took over the warehouse. Dr. Wilson's team chased Apollo in all directions, knocking over equipment and shouting contradictory orders. The German Shepherd, however, demonstrated a tactical precision that seemed impossible for an animal. He wasn't just running away, but doing so in a calculated manner, keeping everyone away from the area where the Mitchell family was. "Hiding. We can't leave him," insisted Jason, seeing the animal's dedication to protecting them. "Son, it's too dangerous," argued Mark, although he was also visibly disturbed by the idea of abandoning Apollo. Sarah, who was carefully observing the movements in the warehouse, noticed something important. "Look, he's not just running away," she whispered. He's trying to reach that computer. Indeed, despite all the pursuit, Apollo seemed to be gradually moving toward a specific workstation, one that still displayed data on the screen and had a flashing light indicating an active USB port. "We have to help him," decided Jason, already preparing to leave the hiding place. Mark held his son by the arm. "Wait, we need a plan." He looked around, assessing the situation. Most of the team members were concentrated on chasing Apollo, leaving parts of the warehouse momentarily unprotected. An idea began to form in his mind. "Sarah, can you see that panel on the wall? It looks like the control for the electrical system." His wife nodded, following Mark's gaze. "If we can cut the power, the confusion will increase. We can use the darkness to reach Apollo and escape together." "How do we do that without being seen?" asked Sarah. Mark looked at Jason, who had always had a special talent for moving silently, a skill honed over years of playing hide-and-seek. "Jason, do you think you can sneak over there without being noticed?" The teenager observed the path to the panel, analyzing the obstacles and the positions of the men. "I can," he replied with conviction. "But what about you?" "As soon as the lights go out, we'll move toward that side exit," explained Mark, pointing to an emergency door partially visible from his observation point. "We'll meet outside on the side of the warehouse." While they finalized the plan, Apollo continued his distraction maneuver. The German Shepherd was now using the cages of the other dogs as obstacles, passing between them and forcing his pursuers to take the longer way around. Most extraordinary was that the other animals seemed to be cooperating, moving within their cages in a way that further blocked the men's passage. "They're working together," murmured Sarah, amazed, "like it's a coordinated operation." "Now," ordered Mark, giving the cue for Jason to start his movement. The teenager left the hiding place crouching, taking advantage of the cover provided by boxes and equipment scattered throughout the warehouse. His slender figure moved with agility, pausing periodically when someone came too close. Meanwhile, Apollo seemed to notice the boy's movement. As if perfectly understanding the plan, the German Shepherd intensified his evasive maneuvers, leading the chase to the opposite side of the warehouse. "He's covering for Jason," realized Sarah, impressed. Jason reached the electrical panel without being detected. Quickly, he identified the main circuit breaker. With a final look at his parents, who nodded encouragingly, he pulled the lever down. The warehouse plunged into total darkness. Cries of surprise and frustration filled the air, followed by frantic orders from Dr. Wilson. "Turn on the emergency. Generators, don't let the Alpha escape." Taking advantage of the confusion, Mark and Sarah left their hiding place, moving quickly toward the agreed meeting point. On the way, Sarah bumped into a table, knocking over something metallic that produced a strident noise. "There's someone here," shouted a voice nearby. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, almost reaching the couple who threw themselves behind a cabinet at the last instant. "Damn," whispered Mark. "They know they're not alone." In the midst of the chaos, Jason reached the side door, pushing it carefully to avoid any noise. Outside, the night seemed even darker after the intense artificial light of the warehouse. "Mom? Dad?" he called in a low voice, worried about his parents' whereabouts. Seconds later, a shadow moved quickly beside him, startling the boy. It was Apollo, who had somehow managed to escape the pursuit and found him at the exit. The German Shepherd was carrying something in his mouth, a small rectangular device that Jason immediately recognized as a flash drive. "You did it," whispered the teenager, amazed at the animal's astuteness. Apollo placed the flash drive at the boy's feet and immediately turned back toward the warehouse, as if indicating that there was still something to be done. His intelligent eyes stared at Jason with an intensity that seemed to convey a clear message. "Keep this. It's important." Inside the warehouse, Mark and Sarah were facing an increasingly complicated situation. The emergency lights had been activated, bathing the environment in a reddish glow that created sinister shadows everywhere. Members of Dr. Wilson's team systematically searched the place, dangerously approaching the couple's hiding place. "We need to move," whispered Mark, watching one of the uniformed men approach. Sarah nodded. her eyes fixed on a nearby door that seemed to lead to another compartment. With a calculated movement, the couple slipped behind a row of cabinets, reaching the door without being detected. To their relief, it opened easily, revealing what appeared to be an office. "Close the door," instructed Sarah, while quickly examining the new environment. The room was clearly the administrative operations center of the project. A large desk dominated the space, covered with documents, photographs, and a laptop that was still on. On the walls, complex diagrams illustrated what appeared to be comparative brain mappings between humans and canines. "Mark, look at this," called Sarah, pointing to a particular chart. The image clearly showed the evolution of Project Sentinel over 5 years. It had begun as an apparently innocent research into animal intelligence, but had evolved into something much more ambitious and disturbing. "They're creating an interspecies neural network," murmured Mark, reading the notes. "Not just increasing the intelligence of dogs, but connecting them to each other. Like a hive," completed Sarah, "a collective mind." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the discovery. Quickly, the couple hid under the desk, holding their breath as the house opened. Dr. Wilson entered, accompanied by another man who wasn't wearing a uniform, but rather an elegant suit that completely clashed with the laboratory environment. "The situation is out of control, Robert," the suited man was saying, visibly agitated. "First, the alpha subject escapes, now we have intruders. The board isn't going to like this." "Calm down, Ernest," replied Dr. Wilson, sitting precisely in the chair in front of the desk where the couple was hiding. "Everything is under control. The alpha can't go far, and whoever entered here will be captured. The project is too advanced to be compromised now," continued Ernest, walking nervously around the room. "Do you have any idea how much we've invested in this? What's at stake?" Dr. Wilson opened a drawer in the desk, taking out a folder which he handed to the other man. "Phase 2 is ready to be implemented. The genetic modifications in the last batch were a total success. The next step is large-scale application." Ernest leafed through the documents, his face changing from anxiety to something close to wonder. "Amazing! And the military potential? Were the tests conclusive?" "Absolutely," confirmed the scientist with a smile of satisfaction. "We've established efficient telepathic commands at a distance of up to 3 miles. Imagine a squad of genetically modified dogs, remotely controlled and capable of coordinating complex actions among themselves. No security system in the world is prepared for that." Under the desk, Sarah and Mark exchanged horrified looks. What they had discovered went far beyond questionable scientific experiments. It was a true biological weapon being developed. "And what about the anomalous behavior of the alpha?" questioned Ernest. "The reports mention that he began to resist commands." Dr. Wilson hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "An unforeseen side effect. Apparently, by amplifying cognitive capacity. So much, we created something close to free will. He not only understands the commands, but has begun to question them. For that's a serious problem," warned Ernest. "If the others develop the same characteristic..." "That's why the alpha needs to be recovered," cut in the scientist. "We need to study this anomaly before proceeding. Fortunately, I installed an inhibitor in his neural chip. He won't be able to maintain this independence for long. The control system will automatically reactivate in the next few hours." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Dr. Wilson's radio. "Doctor, we found footprints at the side exit. They appear to be from a teenager." The scientist's eyes narrowed. "Jason," whispered Sarah, covering her mouth with her hand. "Follow the footprints," ordered Dr. Wilson, "and intensify the search inside the warehouse. Our intruders must be hiding somewhere." As soon as the two men left the room, Mark and Sarah emerged from their hiding place, urgency stamped on their faces. "They're after Jason," said Sarah, her voice trembling with concern. "And from what I understand, Apollo will soon lose control." "Over himself," added Mark. "We need to find them before it's too late." As they examined the room in search of an alternative exit, Sarah noticed something strange on the open laptop. The screen showed a sequence of commands being automatically executed, as if someone were operating it remotely. "Mark, look at this." Her husband approached, observing with astonishment the files being copied to an unknown destination. Someone is accessing the system, but who? The answer came in the form of a message that appeared on the screen. "Find Jason. Back exit. I have the data. A." The couple was momentarily paralyzed by surprise. There was no doubt, somehow, Apollo was communicating with them through the laboratory's system. Outside the warehouse, Jason remained crouched among the bushes, the flash drive firmly secure in his hand, while Apollo remained alert by his side. The teenager could hear voices and footsteps approaching. Dr. Wilson's team had initiated the external search. "We need to find my parents," he whispered to the German shepherd, who seemed to understand him perfectly. Apollo sniffed the night. There, his ears moving in different directions like antennas capturing invisible signals. Suddenly, he touched Jason's arm with his muzzle and made a movement indicating that they should go around the warehouse to the back. "You know where they are?" asked Jason, impressed with the animal's apparent understanding. Following Apollo through the dense vegetation, Jason stayed low, trying to make as little noise as possible. The forest was strangely silent. Not even the nocturnal insects emitted their usual sounds, as if all of nature was holding its breath in the face of the unusual events of that night. When they reached the back of the warehouse, Jason noticed a small service door partially hidden by vines. Apollo sat down in front of it, looking alternately at the door and at the boy. "Are they in there?" asked Jason, approaching cautiously. Before he could reach the handle, the door opened from within, revealing the tense faces of his parents. The relief was instantaneous. Sarah hugged her son tightly, while Mark quickly checked the surroundings to ensure they hadn't been followed. "Thank God you're okay," murmured Sarah, moving away just enough to examine her son from head to toe. "We need to move," warned Mark. "They're everywhere." Jason showed the flash drive. "Apollo got this. I think it's data from the project." Mark nodded, impressed. "He also helped us inside. Somehow he accessed the system to send us a message." "How is that possible?" questioned Jason, looking with renewed amazement at the German shepherd. "We believe he's much more than he appears," explained Sarah quickly. "We heard Dr. Wilson talking about him. Apollo isn't just a super intelligent dog. He's developed a kind of autonomous consciousness. Like a human intellect," completed Mark, "but with abilities we don't fully understand yet." A distant noise interrupted the conversation. Flashlights illuminated the perimeter of the warehouse, and voices were gradually approaching. Apollo reacted immediately, leading the family further away toward the dense vegetation that offered better cover. "He wants us to follow him into the forest," observed Jason. "Are you sure we can trust him?" asked Mark, still hesitant despite everything they had witnessed. It was Sarah who answered with surprising conviction. "If he wanted to harm us, he would have done so already. Besides, Dr. Wilson mentioned an inhibitor in his neural chip. Soon Apollo may lose his independence. If that happens before we're safe..." There was no need to complete the thought. The family followed Apollo into the forest, moving away from the warehouse while the lights and voices of their pursuers gradually diminished. After almost 30 minutes of careful walking through the vegetation, they reached a small clearing where a creek silently cut through the terrain. Apollo stopped, indicating they could momentarily rest. "I think we've lost them, at least for now," said Mark, sitting on a rock while trying to catch his breath. Jason, who had put the flash drive in his pocket, now examined it under the weak moonlight. "We need to find out what's on here. It could be proof of everything we've seen. When we get to Pine Creek, we can access a computer," suggested Sarah. "But now we need to decide our next step. We can't simply go back to the road. They've probably already found our car." Mark pondered for a moment. "The nearest town after Pine Creek is Riverside. If we can get there, we can seek help from the authorities." "Authorities?" questioned Jason. "Dad, you saw what was in that warehouse. The uniformed men, the military equipment. What if part of the government is involved?" The silence that followed demonstrated that they all shared the same concern. Who could they really trust after what they had discovered? That's when Apollo, who had remained quiet until then, emitted a low whine. The German shepherd suddenly seemed uncomfortable, shaking his head as if trying to ward off something invisible. "What's happening to him?" asked Sarah, approaching cautiously. The inhibitor, remembered Mark. Dr. Wilson said it would reactivate automatically. It must be starting to affect his consciousness. Jason knelt beside the animal, gently stroking his head. Apollo, can you fight against it? We need your help. To everyone's surprise, the German Shepherd fixed his gaze on the teenager, and for a fleeting moment, Jason had the impression of seeing a deeply human understanding in those amber eyes. Then, as if making a decision, Apollo approached a muddy area near the creek and, using his paw, began to draw in the wet earth. The family approached, watching with growing amazement what appeared to be a rudimentary map of the region with lines and shapes indicating routes and locations. "My God," whispered Sarah, "he's showing us a path." Jason, who had always been fascinated by maps and geography, quickly interpreted the drawing. "This is our way," he pointed to a sinuous line, "and here seems to be another laboratory or base." "Another laboratory? There's more than one?" asked Mark, alarmed. Apollo continued drawing, adding more details to the improvised map. Using increasingly difficult movements, as if fighting against something internal, the German Shepherd then drew what appeared to be a human figure next to a symbol that resembled a shield. "I think he's indicating a person," suggested Sarah. "Someone who can help us." Apollo confirmed with a nod, surprising them even more with this clear demonstration of communication. Dawn was beginning to tint the sky with pink hues when the Mitchell family, guided by Apollo, reached the limits of a small rural property. Fatigue was evident on their faces after the long night walk through the forest, but their determination had not diminished. What they had discovered was too big to simply ignore. "This is it," said Jason, comparing the location with the map drawn by Apollo hours before. A modest house stood in the center of the property, surrounded by a small orchard and a well-tended garden. An old jeep was parked under a leafy tree, and smoke was coming from the chimney, indicating that someone was awake. Apollo, who had become visibly more agitated in the last few hours, now seemed to constantly fight against an invisible impulse. His movements, previously fluid and precise, sometimes became erratic, as if two opposing forces were disputing control of his body. "The inhibitor is getting stronger," observed Sarah with concern. "He won't be able to resist much longer." Mark stared at the house in the distance, considering the risks. "How do we know we can trust whoever lives there? What if it's someone connected to the project?" "Herr Apollo brought us here for a reason," argued Jason. "Who else can we trust now?" Making a decision, the family cautiously approached the house. Before they could knock on the door, it opened, revealing a middle-aged woman with gray hair tied in a simple bun. Her attentive and penetrating eyes quickly examined the newcomers, lingering longer on Apollo. "I've been expecting you," she said simply, opening the door wider in a silent invitation to enter. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Hayes, and I see you've met Apollo." Surprised by the reception, the family exchanged hesitant looks before accepting the invitation. The interior of the house was as simple as the exterior, but filled with books and technological equipment that clashed with the rural environment. "How did you know we were coming?" asked Mark, still suspicious. Eleanor smiled slightly, bending down to examine Apollo, who was now visibly trembling. "Apollo and I have a connection. I helped create him before I understood the true purpose of Project Sentinel." "You worked with Dr. Wilson?" asked Sarah, tensing up. "I was his main assistant for 3 years," confirmed Eleanor, rising after gently stroking the German Shepherd, "until I discovered that our work, which should have been purely scientific and benefiting humanity, was being directed toward military applications." The scientist led them to the living room, where a table was prepared with coffee and fresh bread, as if she really had been expecting them. "When I protested, I was silenced and removed from the project," she continued, serving coffee for the adults and juice for Jason. "Officially, I suffered a mental breakdown and retired to recover my health. In reality, I was threatened to keep silent about everything I knew." "Why didn't you report it all to the authorities?" questioned Mark. Eleanor laughed bitterly. "The authorities are funding the project. The Department of Defense sees Project Sentinel as the next frontier in intelligence operations and national security. Super intelligent dogs, capable of infiltrating anywhere without raising suspicion, working in a network and controlled remotely. While they talked, Apollo had laid down on the floor, his breathing increasingly labored. Eleanor observed him with regret. The neural inhibitor is almost completely active, she explained. Soon he will completely lose his autonomous consciousness and return to being just a tool. We can't allow that, exclaimed Jason, kneeling beside the animal. After everything he did to help us. Eleanor looked thoughtfully at the teenager, as if evaluating something. There might be a way to help him, but we would need the right equipment. We brought this, intervened Jason, taking the flash drive from his pocket. Apollo got it from the laboratory. We don't know exactly what it contains, but it seemed important. Eleanor's expression brightened as she took the device. This may contain the access codes to the central system. If that's the case, we can not only save Apollo, but potentially expose the entire project. Going to an adjacent room, the scientist led them to what appeared to be a small, improvised laboratory. Computers and sophisticated equipment occupied most of the space. Clearly, Eleanor hadn't completely abandoned her research when she moved away from the official project. During the last year, I've been working on a device to neutralize the KT remote control implanted in the dogs, she explained, connecting the flash drive to a computer. I managed to develop a prototype, but I never had access to the codes necessary to finalize it. While waiting for the computer to process the data, Mark asked, "Why did Apollo choose us, of all the people he could have found on the road?" Eleanor was typing rapidly on the keyboard, her eyes fixed on the screen. Apollo not only developed autonomous consciousness, he managed to access and interpret data from the global system. He probably identified you as people who could help. He analyzed us, asked Sarah, surprised. In a way. The dogs in the project were trained to quickly assess people, identifying patterns of behavior and personality. Apollo elevated this ability to another level. She paused, looking at the family. He saw something in you that he needed. Compassion, courage, and, in Jason's case, a mind open to the possibility of interspecies communication. The computer screen flashed, displaying a sequence of files. Eleanor smiled, satisfied. We've got it. These really are the access codes to the central system. What do we do now? Asked Mark. We need to act quickly, replied Eleanor, already connecting a device to the computer. First, we'll deactivate the inhibitor in Apollo's chip. Then, we'll use the data to expose the project. Jason stroked the German Shepherd, who seemed increasingly debilitated. Hang in there, buddy. We're going to help you. Eleanor worked quickly, transferring codes to a small device that resembled a remote control. This is the neutralizer I developed. With the correct codes, it should be able to deactivate the remote control without damaging the neural chip. Approaching. Apollo. She positioned the device near the nape of the animal's neck, where a small swelling indicated the location of the implant. Here we go. A soft beep sounded when the device was activated. For a few tense seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then gradually Apollo raised his head, his gaze becoming sharper and more focused. His body visibly relaxed and he stood up, shaking himself as if awakening from a long sleep. It worked, exclaimed Jason, observing Apollo regain his composure and attention. The German Shepherd shook himself completely, as if getting rid of an invisible weight, and his eyes reacquired that spark of intelligence that had so impressed the family. Eleanor smiled, clearly relieved. The neutralizer deactivated the remote control, but kept the cognitive enhancements intact. He's free, now to act according to his own will. Apollo approached Jason, gently touching the teenager's arm with his muzzle in a gesture that seemed like gratitude. Then he turned to Eleanor, who nodded as if answering an unformulated question. He wants us to continue, translated the E. Scientist. The work is not yet complete. Back at the computers, Eleanor began to analyze the files obtained from the flash drive in more detail. Her face alternated between expressions of surprise and indignation as she examined documents and reports. "This is much worse than I imagined," she finally said, leaning back in her chair. "Project Sentinel has evolved into something called Operation Cerberus. They're no longer just developing dogs with enhanced intelligence for espionage tasks. They're creating a coordinated attack force." "What do you mean?" asked Mark, approaching. "To see the screen." "More advanced neural implants, genetic modifications to increase strength and endurance, training in combat tactics." Eleanor paused, clearly disturbed. "And the worst part, they're about to expand the program to other animals, primates, birds of prey, even dolphins for maritime operations." "This is a nightmare," murmured Sarah. "How can they play with nature like this?" "To them, they're just tools," replied Eleanor bitterly. "Tools that don't raise suspicion, can't be interrogated, and are disposable." Jason, who had remained beside Apollo, noticed that the dog seemed agitated again, but in a different way. It wasn't the discomfort caused by the inhibitor, but an urgency for action. "He knows something we haven't realized yet," observed the teenager. Eleanor turned her attention to the German Shepherd. "What is it, Apollo? What are we missing?" In response, the animal approached the computer and, to everyone's amazement, used his muzzle to specifically point to an icon on the screen, a file they hadn't yet opened. "Incredible," murmured Mark as Eleanor clicked on the indicated file. A window opened, revealing what appeared to be an operational timeline. The date, highlighted in red, was the next day. "My God!" exclaimed Eleanor. "Operation Cerberus will be initiated tomorrow. They're going to transfer all the animals to the military base in Grand Junction for the final tests before the global implementation of the project. That means we have less than 24 hours to stop them," concluded Mark, the gravity of the situation weighing on everyone. "How can we do that?" questioned Sarah. "We're just a family and a scientist against the government, apparently." Eleanor paused as if pondering something important. "Maybe we're not as alone as we think." She turned to Apollo. "The neural connection between the dogs in the project, it's still active, isn't it?" The German Shepherd nodded with a clear movement of his head, again surprising Mark and Sarah with this very human gesture. "What does that mean?" asked Jason, beginning to understand where Eleanor wanted to go. "It means Apollo can still communicate with the other dogs," explained the scientist, a plan beginning to form in her mind. "And if he was able to develop autonomy, it's possible that the others also have this potential." "Are you suggesting a canine rebellion?" asked Mark, incredulous. "I'm suggesting that we free these animals from the control that was imposed on them," corrected Eleanor. "The same way we did with Apollo." Jason smiled, enthusiastic about the idea. "Let's transform their tools into our allies." "Exactly," agreed Eleanor. "But for that, we need to return to the laboratory." A heavy silence fell over the group. The idea of returning to the place they had fled from was, at the very least, frightening. "There must be dozens of men looking for us now," argued Mark. "How could we get back in?" Eleanor smiled, a gleam of determination in her eyes. "They're looking for 3 human intruders. They're not looking for me, a retired ex-scientist who officially has no connection whatsoever to the project for more than a year. Still, it would be extremely risky," pondered Sarah. "I have something that might give us an advantage," replied Eleanor, going to a locked cabinet in the corner of the laboratory. From it, she removed a metal case that, when opened, revealed 6 devices similar to the neutralizer used on Apollo. More compact versions of the neutralizer. With the codes we obtained, I can program them to deactivate the remote control in several dogs simultaneously. So the plan would be for me to enter as an official visitor, plant these devices, and release the dogs, asked Eleanor, articulating the plan aloud. "It's too dangerous for you to go alone," protested Mark. "If you're discovered." "I know that laboratory better than anyone," argued Eleanor. "I know how to move around without raising suspicion. Besides, many of the younger scientists don't know me personally. They only know there was a researcher who left the project." Sarah, who had remained silent, analyzing the situation, intervened. "Eleanor is right. It's our best chance. But we need a contingency plan in case something goes wrong." The evening was casting long shadows over the forest when Eleanor's jeep approached the limits of the property where the secret laboratory was installed. The scientist drove with determination, while mentally reviewing each step of the carefully elaborated plan in the previous hours. In the passenger seat, Mark carefully observed the road, looking for signs of surveillance or patrols. In the back seat, Sarah held a folder with falsified documents that Eleanor had prepared, credentials that they hoped would guarantee her access to the complex. "Remember," said Eleanor as she slowed down, "once inside the perimeter, you have to remain hidden in the vehicle. If something goes wrong, go to the meeting point as we agreed." Mark nodded gravely. The decision to accompany Eleanor had not been easy, but the idea of letting her face such danger alone was unthinkable. Jason, however, had remained at the house with Apollo, monitoring communications through the system that Eleanor had configured. "We're arriving," announced Eleanor, spotting the control post in the distance. Moment of truth. Approaching the guard booth, Eleanor adjusted her glasses and assumed a professional posture. When the guard approached, she lowered the window with a confident smile. "Dr. Emily Thompson, Department of Defense Advisor," she announced, handing over the forged documents. "I'm here for a routine inspection before the scheduled transfer tomorrow." The guard carefully examined the documents before returning them. "We weren't informed of any visit today, Doctor." "These inspections are deliberately unannounced," replied Eleanor firmly. "Standard security policy for Alpha-level operations. If you prefer, I can call General Miller directly." The mention of the high official's name discovered in the flash drive files had the desired effect. The guard backed off slightly, consulting his supervisor by radio before finally authorizing entry. "Sorry for the inconvenience, Doctor. You may proceed." Eleanor slowly advanced along the path leading to the main complex, maintaining a neutral expression despite her racing heart. In the back seat, Sarah and Mark remained crouched, covered by a dark tarp. "First stage completed," whispered Eleanor as she parked the Jeep in a less illuminated area of the complex. "Now comes the difficult part." Adjusting the coat where she had hidden the neutralizers, Eleanor exited the vehicle and walked confidently toward the main entrance. Each step was calculated, each gesture studied to convey the authority of someone who belonged there. Inside the laboratory, activity was intense. Scientists and technicians moved hurriedly, preparing equipment and organizing documents for the imminent transfer. Eleanor advanced through the corridors naturally, occasionally nodding to people who barely looked up from their tasks. Following the memorized indications from the files, she headed to the animal containment sector, the heart of Project Sentinel. As she approached the restricted area, she was approached by a security guard. "Identification, please." Eleanor presented her falsified documents again, maintaining her confident posture. "I need to verify the subjects before the transfer." "Direct orders from Washington." The guard hesitated briefly before clearing the way. "Do you need technical accompaniment, Doctor?" "That won't be necessary," she replied with a smile. "I prefer to make my observations without interference. Standard procedure, you understand?" Once alone in the containment area, Eleanor acted quickly. The cages were aligned in organized rows, each containing a dog of exceptionally alert appearance. Unlike common animals in captivity, these observed their surroundings with a disturbing awareness. "Let's free them," she murmured, removing the first neutralizer from the inner pocket of her coat. Approaching the first cage, where a border collie watched her attentively, Eleanor activated the device. The small apparatus emitted a silent pulse, affecting not only the immediately close dog, but also those in adjacent cages. Immediately, a subtle change occurred in the animals. Their gazes, previously vaguely absent despite the attention, gained a new focus, a spark of self-awareness that Eleanor immediately recognized. "It's working," she whispered, feeling a wave of hope. "You can understand me now, can't you?" In response, the border collie tilted its head in a deliberate movement, a clear affirmative sign. Eleanor smiled, moving to position the other neutralizers at strategic points in the room, maximizing their reach. While she worked, she didn't notice the figure silently entering the room behind her. "Dr. Eleanor Hayes," Dr. Wilson's cold voice cut through the silence. "What an unpleasant surprise." Eleanor froze, slowly turning to face her former colleague. The scientist observed her with a mixture of disdain and curiosity, a discreet pistol pointed in her direction. "Robert," she responded calmly, "I imagine we're still at the stage where we talk civilly." "That depends entirely on what you came here to do," he replied, approaching cautiously. "Although I have my suspicions considering your history of ethical objections." Eleanor maintained a firm posture, aware that she needed to buy time. From the corners of her eyes, she noticed the dogs attentively observing the scene, as if waiting for a signal. "I came to prevent you from committing an irreparable mistake," she declared. "Project Sentinel was born as legitimate research on animal cognition. What you're doing now is a perversion of that objective." Dr. Wilson laughed, a humorless sound. "Always the idealist, Eleanor. Science doesn't progress with sentimentality. What we've achieved here transcends your small ethical concerns." "We've achieved?" she retorted. "You've created sentient beings only to enslave them as weapons. This isn't science, Robert. It's tyranny." The scientist narrowed his eyes. "How did you get in here? And more importantly, who else knows about us?" Before Eleanor could answer, an alert sounded in the complex's security system. Dr. Wilson momentarily diverted his attention to a nearby monitor, which displayed images from the external cameras. "Your friends from the road," he concluded, recognizing the Jeep where Mark had moved to the driver's seat. "I must congratulate you on your persistence, Eleanor, but now it's over." He raised the radio to call for reinforcements, but at that exact moment, something extraordinary happened. As if responding to a silent command, all the dogs in the laboratory began to bark simultaneously, a deafening chorus that broke Dr. Wilson's concentration. Eleanor took advantage of the distraction to advance, hitting the arm that held the gun. In the ensuing struggle, the last neutralizer in her pocket fell to the floor, accidentally activating with the impact. A wave of invisible energy spread through the room, affecting all electronic systems. The cage locks, designed to open automatically in case of electrical failure to avoid the loss of valuable animals, released simultaneously. In seconds, the dogs were free, moving with impressive purpose and coordination. Dr. Wilson observed the scene with growing horror. "What have you done?" "I just gave back to them what you stole," replied Eleanor, breathless. "Their freedom of choice." In the chaos that followed, alarms went off throughout the complex. Eleanor ran to the exit, followed by several of the freed dogs. In the corridors, staff and security guards tried to understand what was happening, while animals ran in all directions, not in panic but in coordinated movements that seemed to follow some kind of plan. When Eleanor finally reached the exterior, she saw that Mark had positioned the Jeep near the entrance, engine running and ready for escape. Sarah opened the door, helping her in. "Did you succeed?" asked Mark, anxious. "More than we expected," replied Eleanor as the vehicle drove off toward the gates. In the general confusion, they managed to pass through the guard post without being detained, accelerating along the forest road. Only when they were at a safe distance did Mark slow down, allowing everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. "And the dogs?" asked Sarah, looking through the rear window. "They know what to do," replied Eleanor with a confident smile. "The neural network that Dr. Wilson created to control them now serves to coordinate their freedom." When they arrived at Eleanor's house, they found Jason anxiously awaiting on the porch, Apollo by his side. The teenager ran to the Jeep as soon as he saw it approaching. "It worked," he exclaimed, hugging his parents. "We managed to access all the project servers. The evidence is being sent to journalists and international authorities right now." Eleanor smiled, stroking Apollo's head as he came to greet her. "That was your plan from the beginning, wasn't it? To use their own technology against the project." The German shepherd seemed almost to smile in response, his intelligent eyes shining with what could only be described as satisfaction. In the weeks that followed, the Project Sentinel scandal dominated national and international news. Documents revealed the extent of unethical experimentation and the military plans behind the research. Dr. Wilson and various high-ranking officials faced inquiries and serious accusations. On a quiet afternoon, 2 months after the events at the laboratory, The Mitchell family relaxed on the porch of the house they had rented on the outskirts of Boulder. Their old life had been temporarily suspended while they served as key witnesses in the ongoing investigations. "We received news from Eleanor," announced Sarah, looking up from her cell phone. "The protection network for modified dogs is growing. They've already managed to shelter more than 30 of them in special sanctuaries." Apollo, who now officially lived with them, raised his head upon hearing the news. The German Shepherd had adapted perfectly to family life, although they all recognized that he was much more than a simple pet. "He always knew he would find a home with us," commented Jason, observing the dog with admiration. "From the moment he saw us on the road." Mark nodded, thoughtful. "I think all of us found something we didn't expect on that trip. A greater purpose." As the sun set on the horizon, Apollo approached Jason, resting his head on his lap in a gesture of affection. The bond between them transcended the species barrier. It was a connection based on mutual respect and the understanding that intelligence and compassion can manifest in the most unexpected forms. "You know what's most amazing?" reflected Jason, stroking the animal's fur. "It wasn't technology that made Apollo special. It was his capacity to make choices, to care about other beings." Sarah smiled, observing the scene with tenderness. "In the end, that's the true measure of consciousness, isn't it? The capacity to connect, to care." Apollo raised his gaze, his amber eyes meeting those of each member of the family that had welcomed him. In that look was a depth that words could never express, the silent gratitude of one who had finally found his place in the world. And as stars began to dot the night sky, the Mitchell family contemplated the future with a new perspective. The journey that had begun with an unexpected encounter on a rural road had transformed not only their lives, but potentially humanity's. Understanding of consciousness and the connection between all creatures.